Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes here while everyone filters in. And let me share my screen, even though it won't let me. Well, we'll just let everybody filter in. Welcome while you're coming in. The chat should be open. So feel free to, I don't know, let us know where you're coming from, where you're watching right now. I don't know. I always like hearing about where people are running ngrok right now. Are you using it on a Raspberry Pi in your living room, on a home lab, in production, in Kubernetes? Would love to hear that as well. And it looks like most people are coming in. We've got people from Toronto, from Ghana, using Windows, of course. Awesome. All right. Well, let's get started. Welcome to the sixth session of Office Hours. If this is your first time here, Office Hours is a monthly live stream. It's roughly 45 minutes long. We kind of see how things go and what kind of questions are asked live, where we answer questions directly from our community of developers and engineers. Some of you might have noticed this, that when you register for office hours, you have an opportunity to ask a question ahead of time. I highly encourage you all to do that. It gives us time to prepare our answers and prepare demos if it makes sense. So that's always super appreciated. But we also love to hear, questions and feedback and suggestions right here in the chat as well. My name is Joel. I do all things DevRel and content around ngrok. And I'm very excited about today's session and discussions because we have Ishan here. Ishan, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Ishan. I'm a solutions engineer here at ngrok. Very excited to be part of the session and getting to talk to all of you. I see that we have a very international audience, which is always really cool to see. And yeah, this is going to be my first office hour, so really excited to chat with everyone and kind of talk to you about some of our newer applications and all those kinds of fun things. So really great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Ishan. And yeah, awesome to see the chat as lively as it is. I think, yeah, David, I feel like I remember seeing you from a previous session. So welcome back. And we have Varun from Toronto using ngrok to test Twilio and Fast API. That's awesome. Kind of developer preview testing stuff has long been a core part of ngrok. And I feel like that actually transitions nicely into kind of the core discussion that we wanted to have today. We're going to try, some new things here at office hours, like just having more broad discussions about some of the use cases for ngrok and some of the things we find really exciting internally. And as you probably saw from either emails or the office hours registration page, AI is a big thing right now. And exploring all the different ways that ngrok enables different AI-based use cases. So probably what I would love to hear, and I know Ishan would as well, like if what LLMs are people using? Are you playing around with stuff? What are you developing with or on those LLMs would be awesome as well. And we'll kind of, if anybody feels like chiming in, we'll use that kind of to guide our discussion going forward. But Ishan, I know you feel pretty passionately about this idea of self-hosting LLMs and the benefits of that. So maybe if people here aren't familiar with the value of doing that, maybe they get self-hosting other things, but not LLMs. Like, how do you see that equation playing out in their favor?
Yeah, I think especially in today's day and age, when you have so many different LLMs coming to the surface from different regions of the world with different compliance standards, different security standards, when you're publicly hosting an LLM, sometimes it does come with those security risks or security breach access for malware and things like that. So, when you're able to self-host or privately host these LLMs, you really get more ownership and you get more maintainability over that LLM. And, you can be sure that different data, customer data, isn't being used maliciously by these different AI companies. For example, DeepSeek was a really big one that came across recently, and there's been a lot of kind of controversy or pushback regarding that, depending on their security standards and things like that when it comes to public data, customer data, and kind of, how they secure that internally. So the way I see it is, privately hosting an LLM, it really protects you from those risks, and you have more maintainability, more customizability when it comes to fine-tuning your LLM. And really you get more of a chance to be creative and play around and develop to the best of your ability. And so that's really kind of the power of self-hosting or private hosting from the way I see it.
Yeah. I think the the one thing I really remember strongly from the DeepSeek hype that was, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe. It seems longer than that, but maybe I'm misremembering, was our security person within ngrok was like, please do not send stuff to DeepSeek, especially anything related to ngrok, just because of all of those unknowns. And we haven't, like there's just so many risks and potential downfalls of doing things that way.
Mhm.
Um, what about like cost savings? Do you think that plays a role in how people are doing this? Like if you self-hosted GPU accelerated VM somewhere or cluster or something, maybe that ends up being cheaper than paying OpenAI thousands upon
Yeah.
thousands of times.
Yeah, and especially, depending on what your use case is, if you're trying to send, thousands of requests every day, or if you're trying to send a large volume of requests to this model, then when you're using a publicly hosted platform, then the cost can really, really build up, especially if you're trying to build up a small company, or if you're trying to, work on if you're building a startup, or if you're just trying to work on a passion project, or do any of those things, then it can really be taxing when it comes to the costs that are associated with it. So another great benefit to self-hosting is, you can really gain control over that, and you can put more resources toward other areas that are needing it. So definitely a really cool avenue for people to go down, again, especially if you're trying to, pull together the resources to create a startup, or if you're just kind of working on your own passions. Those things really come into play.
Yeah, awesome. I noticed Jack in the chat saying that he's using the OpenAI API, and it's been a little while since I've checked the different APIs from these different providers. But I think one of the nice things about going that route to start, like you maybe experiment a little bit with OpenAI, see what it does for you, and then you can host something like Olama, which I
Mhm.
know we will talk about and we'll demo that a little bit later. But you can kind of like it's pretty easy to make that transition from like using a big AI provider and their API to like just flipping a switch over to a self-hosted one. Maybe you have to change your API requests a little bit. Yeah, Jack said it's super easy to build an MVP on it. Make sure that AI like makes sense for you, but then flip the switch over to something self-hosted, if and when that makes sense to you. But I
Yeah.
think also like we also are very bullish on the idea of like making it very easy to build that MVP self-hosted and with ngrok. So I think that'll be like the demo we get into it a little bit later. Will hopefully be a good preview of kind of how we see that.
Yeah. And also just, I'm sure people are also new to ngrok and the platform and the technologies that we use, and kind of the architecture that it's built on. So I think it'll give a great idea as well to those people, kind of what we're all about, ease of use in terms of how easy it is to set up. It can be done, and for most people that we work with, they do it in less than an hour. So it'll give a little bit of an insight into how our platform works, what we offer, at kind of a base level, and also kind of how we can uh, enable this idea of a self-hosted LLM, which is really cool.
Yeah. You also, I think you probably, I don't know if you coined this term yourself, or at least you were the first one to surface it to me, which is this idea of LLM preview. I think maybe replacing the idea of developer preview from the past. So do you want to dig into that a little bit and tell people how you imagine that, whether
Yeah,
it's ngrok or not?
yeah. So actually, the idea came from one of our prospective customers, who reached out to us. He was working on a model, and he wanted some of his other developers to get easy access to this model, even if they weren't working directly on his machine. And so that use case is really aligned with, what we offer developers when, you want developers in the same organization or the same team to be able to work on something running in a local environment and work collaboratively on it. So that kind of gave me the idea of, yeah, it's a developer preview, but in this specific case, it's an LLM preview or an AI preview where you want to give that snapshot or that remote access to your model, which is running locally, and essentially just share it across teams and, without having to deploy it or having all this like stand up infrastructure or open a port or things like that. So really just the idea is to make it accessible for anyone on your team to go in and develop and work on it. And, the way that ngrok does it is we just kind of give you a one endpoint, one entrance point for basically, here you go. This is what you're going to use. It can be, like a TCP endpoint that you use to just access this LLM remotely and get to work on it. So that's kind of the idea. We've had a couple of customers come to us about that. So that's kind of where I was seeing the similarities, and that's kind of where it came about.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited about this idea of LLM preview, and I was thinking about some sort of writing some sort of editorial piece on it, kind of fiery-ish editorial piece on like how we think of LLM preview and, kind of the it's like developer preview 2.0, and what that means for people. So awesome. Yeah. And we actually have customers already using ngrok for this LLM preview use case. We actually on our blog, I'll pull up the link when I've got a minute, but we recently featured a company called Hey Sam, and they are using ngrok to a developer will be working on a part of their service locally. And so then they can stand up an ngrok endpoint with a public URL and pass that URL to the webhooks for their staging transcription service so that when that service is transcribing audio from meetings, it can, it pipes that straight to their local development environment, and then they can, build and test against all of that with like much faster iteration cycles than they would have if they had to, if they had to like try to recreate the entire infrastructure locally or, do something else. Like it's just very easy for them to move fast. And they also do this really cool thing where they stand up ngrok endpoints when they're developing new versions of their LLMs, and they use feature flagging to like mirror a portion of production traffic over to this like in development version of their LLM that they're self-hosting. And they can see how the two interact with one another, or like how they differ in their responses as a way to like continuously improve how their LLMs, which they are fine tuning themselves, behave. So like really cool use cases already. I don't know, Ishan, are you seeing like you're talking with people in a lot of calls as people are, they're asking about ngrok can help them stand some of these things up. Like what are you seeing in other sort of generalized use cases?
Yeah. People are currently having a lot of issues when it comes to, shareability of their models. And really what they want is a kind of a centralized platform where they can, generate these endpoints and they can really just share it across platforms. That's kind of the biggest use case that I've seen when it comes to talking to different customers. Um, and a lot of them are really, kind of early stage startups where they are trying to find a cheaper way to, host these LLMs and create collaboration within their teams so they can really ramp up production and they can, get their product out as fast as possible, get iterations done, get feedback. So those and seeing ngrok as kind of a cost-effective solution for that has been really eye-opening because it's been, it's been an interesting take on our developer preview use case. And it's really cool to see other people, kind of mold that into their own use cases and their own interests. So they kind of architect their own solution in a way, and then we kind of allow them to be creative and customize a solution for them. So that's kind of been the general use cases from what I've seen when talking to customers about LLM preview. And I'm sure it's just going to be, more and more customers being interested and an up and coming use case for us for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what makes ngrok kind of exciting and dynamic and like from our perspective, to
Mm.
see these customers coming in because there's no one size fits all like usage of ngrok. They all have a slightly different way that they want to, put different endpoints in different places and use traffic policy, which again we'll talk about momentarily. And kind of the flow of traffic through different endpoints is
Hmm.
always a little different. I mean, we have another one, another customer right now that is actually using AI and ML for like a internal platform for their own developers, and they want to be able to have this single portal. It's like mlportal.example.com, where developers can go and launch an LLM lab that's running on Kubernetes, like a bunch of H100s, GPUs, like super powerful hardware stack. And behind the scenes, they want to be able to spin up like this lab for their developers to be able to work on ML applications without having to ask them to go set it up and do all this stuff themselves or recreate it locally. And like they get that kind of good platform engineering experience of like they own the governance and the security and the deployment mechanisms on all of it, but then their developers get the nice benefit of just going to this site, spinning up a lab, and having access to this enormous GPU power that they, would be a huge problem to get to otherwise. So yeah,
Yeah.
really, really interesting use cases that we're already seeing. I see a couple people in the chat talking about like tunneling to AI projects, and if any of you feel like you want to, dig in a little bit about like what parts of ngrok you're using to make that possible, we'd be so curious to hear about like the practical and kind of technical pieces of ngrok in alongside everything else you're doing. Um, but I feel like maybe this is a good opportunity. We've kind of had our preamble about, ngrok and AI, but demos always kind of speak for themselves. And
Mhm.
I know you've got something that you've been cooking up on Olama and making that secure and accessible. So maybe I will, if you're ready, I'll pass things over to you and kind of let you walk everyone through at least one version of how you could use ngrok and a
Yeah.
self-hosted AI together.
Absolutely. Yeah, before I get into that, I wanted to actually shout out one comment from the chat. Eugene was kind of talking about how when a workflow is fluid, you know, self-hosting can really help simulate all of the possible risks. That's actually a really good point, and it really feeds well into my demo because, I'll be talking a little bit about the flexibility with our traffic policy when you want to secure your connections with, either IP restrictions or MTLS, things like that. Um, and that is just it's a great point. And I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, great. Can everyone see a kind of a dashboard with TCP addresses on it?
I certainly can.
Okay, great. So essentially what I'm going to be doing in this demo, just to kind of give us a broad overview first thing, is so I currently have an Olama model running locally on my laptop. And pretty much what I'm going to be doing is using ngrok to expose that publicly over a port and then securing that connection with MTLS. And so the way that this kind of works is we're able to really make this model shareable as well as secure the connection. All of ngrok's outbound tunnel runs on TLS, and we're going to double encrypt it with MTLS as well. So the way that I'm going to do that, here we go. I can just open my terminal. So the way that we're going to do that is we're first going to reserve a TCP address that we're going to use to access our LLM. So currently my LLM for Olama by default is running on port 11434. And so the way that I can do that is the first thing I have to do is reserve a TCP address on the ngrok dashboard. Now this dashboard is pretty much where all the magic happens. This is where we generate endpoints. We can create IP policies, traffic policy. We can inspect our traffic. We can reserve domains. We can create, TLS certificates, CAs. We can create API keys. This whole platform has a platform API, which we can use to generate auth tokens. So all that kind of good stuff is where all of this is where all of that lives. So when you sign up for ngrok, whether you have a free account or a paid account, you will have access to a dashboard that looks just like this. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reserve a TCP address. So it's very easy to do. I've actually already gone ahead and done that. So here is my TCP address, which is I've just named it Olama TCP address. And the way I did that is I'm just going here, creating a new TCP address. I can just type in a description and it's going to give me a random TCP address. Now this address is what I'm going to use now that I've reserved. I can use it directly in my agent. So when I say agent, for people that are a little bit more unfamiliar with ngrok, we run in a couple of different ways. The great thing about ngrok is it can run as either an agent binary or you can run it programmatically as an SDK. If you're running Python or if you're running Go, for example, we can, programmatically embed it directly into your code. What I'm going to show today is how we, how our agent binary works. So when you install the agent directly on your machine, it will come with a configuration file, and I'll get into that in a second. But essentially what happens is you install this ngrok agent, which can run anywhere that can run software. So like Joel mentioned earlier, if you're running it on a Raspberry Pi, or if you run it on a Linux image or a Docker image, or a Windows server. So that's one of the great things that you can use ngrok for. And so let me just open my ngrok configuration file. And this is kind of what I have it set up to be currently. So here we can see my auth token for my specific agent. So each agent is tied to an auth token. And then here I can list out the endpoints that I'm trying to generate, or endpoints that I'm trying to start. So here I've listed out one endpoint that I'm creating. I'm just naming it Olama because that's what I'm trying to access. And then this URL field here is the TCP address that I just reserved from the domain, so that we want to bind that connection to that TCP address. When we want to talk about upstream, this is going to be our upstream service that we're trying to forward to directly. So because my Olama server is running on port 11434, that's going to be my upstream URL in this case. I'm going to take a quick second and check the chat if anyone has any questions before I get into the next part of the demo. Okay, I think we're good to go. Again, if anyone has any questions, please just type it in the chat. I'll be checking it periodically. Save that. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this tunnel. Actually, before I do that, let me just show you guys where I'm running this. So I am running this Olama server on port 11434, like I mentioned before. So if I just start this, ngrok start dash dash hall is going to start all the tunnels I have listed in my configuration files. This is the address that we had mentioned, the one that we reserved, and this is where it's forwarding to. This is in my local environment where my Olama port is set. And so what I can do here is I can set up a listener on that port. And the way I'm going to do that is with socat. And so here we have set up a listener on port 11434, forking it with our ngrok URL that we generated from our configuration file. And if I just start that listener, it's now listening on that port. And now what I can do is I can make requests to the model directly via the API. So I can go in and do this command. This is just a basic curl command that I want to basically make a request to the API, and I want to prompt it with a question. So I can say, what's your name? The model I'm currently using is Mistral, so it's Olama Mistral. This will work with with any Olama model or any other LLM that you choose to use, as long as you understand the port that it's running on and the port that we're going to be exposing it on with ngrok. So if I just type in what's your name, it'll give me a response. And essentially it will, did I freeze for a second? Okay. So here's our response, right? It has answered the question, what's your name? It's a lot of mess right now because it's an API response header, but you can see here, I don't have a personal name. I am a model of the Mistral family kind of thing. It's answering the question. And I can even ask it, if I want to ask it another question. Do you like ngrok? So, we're able to generate a response remotely because of the port that we've opened up with ngrok directly. And this is just one of the really cool responses that we can see, and we can use the model and develop on it from the port. And one more thing I can show, actually. Let me open a new window. So we want to see that we're hitting this ngrok tunnel, right? One tool I can use for that is something called telnet. And this is specifically for TCP addresses when you're running it on a port. And if I run this, it's saying we're connected to tcp.ngrok.io, and I can see this open connection here within my ngrok terminal, which is really cool for visibility, for observability within our dashboard. We can see all of our open connections. We can see, response time, latency, things like that. And this is just a really cool way that we can, basically self-host this LLM that I have running on a port, which is essentially the broad scheme of what I've just done here. Now, one of the, main benefits when it comes to self-hosting an LLM comes from the privacy and the security you get from it. The way that ngrok works is when I install this agent on my laptop, makes an outbound connection on port 443 using TLS. So it's already an encrypted connection. Now we're going to double encrypt it with MTLS, which means that you have, very strong layer of security there for whatever maybe sensitive customer data you might be working with, sensitive data when it comes to building out your LLMs. None of that data is encrypted, so it's zero knowledge, or decrypted, so it's zero knowledge. So before I get into that, I want to just show you a little bit about a little bit more of the dashboard. So I just created an endpoint here, and this is the endpoint from the TCP address that I had just reserved. There's something I like to call traffic policy. So traffic policy essentially is a way that we can customize the traffic flowing through our tunnels, through the agent and through the upstream service. It works in different phases. So we have on HTTP request, on HTTP response, and on TCP connect. And within these phases, we can customize the traffic. We can make it really flexible. We have different actions that we can do. We can IP restrict. We can deny traffic from certain geolocations. So these are all really cool tools that we can use with traffic policy. One of my favorite tools that I like to use is MTLS encryption. And so the way that I can enable that on my endpoint is I can go in. I'm going to close this connection for now. I can go into my configuration file, and I'm going to paste this in. It's going to be kind of a lot, but I will walk through it line by line. Okay, 1 second. It's kind of a long certificate, so I want to make sure that I'm getting all of it. Okay, right. Okay, there we go. Huh. Okay, perfect. So basically what I want to show you now is this is the traffic policy that I was talking about earlier. We can embed this directly at the agent level, which means that I can just type it in directly to my configuration file. This also works with something we have called cloud endpoints, which are hosted on our SaaS platform directly rather than at the agent level. So if I have a cloud endpoint, this will work just the same, except I'm going to just go in and put all this information on the platform of the endpoint itself. Now, like I said, this happens in phases. Since we have a TCP endpoint, I'm putting it on TCP connect phase. When the TCP connection happens, I want this action to occur. And the action type that I'm talking about is terminate TLS. So I want this connection to terminate TLS at the agent level itself. And all I need to do is configure a mutual TLS certificate authority. So if you have a cert, you basically just paste that in here. And what it's going to do is it's going to perform a handshake at the agent level between your client side and the server side. And it's just going to say, hey, I have my certificate here. Do you have a matching certificate? Great. We're all aligned. We have the same certificate. Now we can go ahead and proceed with the connection. And this is essentially a way that we can just make the connection to our LLMs, to my Olama server, much more secure. And that's kind of what I was able to do within 3 or 4 lines of configuration writing. And the way that we can self-host in this way is really powerful, and that I was able to pretty much just expose a port on Olama, make API responses, use an ngrok URL, encrypt it with MTLS. And for most customers, this takes maybe less than 30 minutes or an hour to even set up. So it's one of the cool things that ngrok is doing with a lot of our customers, and they really love the functionality of it. So please let me know if you have any questions. I know it was kind of a lot to share, but let's see. Let me just look through the chat right now.
Yeah, I've answered a few questions, but it never hurts to repeat some of them
Yeah,
aloud for everybody. Yeah.
sure. Um, Maxim, why we are using the version section in your config YAML? Great question. So the ngrok agent has many different versions. So we had a version 2, and now we have a version 3. So that's basically just telling the configuration, what fields can we use, or can we use updated fields for version 3? For example, before endpoints was in version 3, we called it tunnels in version 2. So it's pretty much just letting the configuration file what version we want to use. Stanley, what is 29941 port doing? Great question. So that's the port that's the default port that, or wait, was that my ngrok port? Yeah. So that is the TCP port that ngrok assigns to my endpoint. And that is essentially the networking layer that we use to then connect outward, to then connect to our LLM server. So those are dynamic ports that are generated by our ngrok cloud platform, and they're different for every TCP endpoint that you generate. Eugene, never dived into the ngrok config yet. Is it possible to add many at a time in the config, i.e. having different listener in the config?
My assumption with Eugene's question was, can you have multiple, they are upstream blocks, but
Oh,
pointing, like having one agent point to multiple upstreams, and I was like, absolutely, you can.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah, so if I want to point to a different upstream service, I can, under that same section of endpoints, I can just say, hey, here's another endpoint name. Here's another TCP address or HTTP address that I want to point to. And I can just put it all in the same config file. Yeah,
awesome.
great.
All
Cool.
right. Yeah, I'm
That's all I
gonna,
have to show, but yeah, please let me know if you have any other questions about it. Just a brief demo that we were able to get through. So
yeah, thanks so much, Ishan. I'm just gonna show very quickly like the path that someone can find some of the stuff themselves. Especially if they are, if you're not familiar with traffic policy yet, maybe you just use ngrok as like ngrok http 8080, and that's the extent of your usage so far, and you're wondering what this thing is. We have an entire section of our documentation devoted to traffic policy, and some quick starts to help you figure out like how do you want to use it like along with your current usage of the ngrok CLI, or an SDK or a Kubernetes operator. I mean, it works the same everywhere. But what to kind of go into what Ishan was showing was, if you go into our actions section, these are all of the different actions that you can take on traffic at those different phases. And so Ishan was using the terminate TLS uh, action. And if you kind of scroll down to the bottom of the page, we actually have an entire step-by-step guide, if you will, about how you can generate the certificates and, kind of replicate the behavior that Ishan was showing of uh, creating this traffic policy file, adding a certificate. Ishan was using the config file to start, but you could also, pass a traffic policy file with this flag in the CLI, and then you can, make requests using the client certificates to make it kind of like bridge it all together. So yeah, if you're not familiar with this yet, please go take a look. I also highly recommend checking out the examples. We are, I think, pretty close to shipping a different structure around these that has, a bit more organization based on use cases. But if you're kind of looking for like a recipe, or just like I want to get this thing done and I don't know how, I don't know, a popular one is blocking bots from reaching your endpoints. Like you could just grab this, copy it into your traffic policy file, and it'll work regardless of which environment you're running ngrok in, or whether you're using a CLI or a cloud endpoint, or anything else. So I am going to take a moment also to look at the questions. Eugene is asking about configurations impacting response time. I think certainly, if you are like MTLS is definitely, if that's, what you're talking about, that just being requiring additional handshakes will add some, degree of latency over a unsecured connection. But I think for, if you're thinking about using MTLS, the value is worth the price and latency. One of the big benefits of ngrok is that all of these traffic policy actions, whether it's adding headers, enforcing TLS or MTLS, rate limiting, everything else, it's happening on the ngrok network as opposed to, on your service, or, embedded directly in your service. And that is certainly going to be faster than if a request had to make it all the way to your service, run through some, let's say, rate limiting logic, and then get a response back. Like we handle all of that for you. So we have, I think it's 8 different points of presence around the globe, for, being able to respond to people very quickly based on where they are requesting from. So yeah, as all things, it's a compromise, but I think it's a pretty minimal one. We've got just a couple minutes here. Trying to think about which of these kind of questions that I want to get into. We had a really interesting question that was asked via the registration form um, about using ngrok for AI testing, or, they're again like self-hosting an AI model and using 2 different virtual or VPSs, and having those communicate to one another. And like how does ngrok handle, or, like what are the security implications of doing that? So what I wanted to answer there was that ngrok's kind of core tunneling technology is more secure than what you would think of as maybe traditional methods of having 2 different servers communicate with each other, like opening ports, and it's going to be easier than setting up a VPC, a private cloud, to be able to isolate that traffic. So I think that again, like the yeah, the setup that's required here is just going to be way simpler for you overall. And I think probably the architecture of how you use ngrok's endpoints depends a little bit on whether the VPSs are communicating with each other, or if one is sending requests to the other. But that kind of, like depends on how you've architected the system. But yeah, what are the cheapest plans for a developer to test their product? I think we're bringing some changes to packaging pretty soon, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe check back soon. But we do think that our free plan is a great way to be able to test out. You can create agent endpoints. You can test out traffic policy and kind of see how all of this stuff plays out before you decide to kind of bring it into production use cases. Got a plan that was deprecated and wanted. So our free plan does allow you to create they each come with one free static ngrok domain. So you can reserve a domain like, brandon.ngrok.app if you want to test things out. But then I believe if you want to bring in custom domains, that would be a part of a paid plan as well. Am I right about that, Ishan? Packaging is
Yeah.
always okay. Packaging
Yeah,
is an area that, like, yeah.
yeah, we are going through a restructuring when it comes to pricing and packaging. But yeah, every free account comes with one free static domain. Um, and you can generate as many ephemeral endpoints as well through that. So I think that's
Perfect.
a good place to start.
Brandon, if you have further questions, yeah, and if there's any questions that people have in general about, billing or kind of account related questions, we have support at ngrok.com. I'll just drop that in the chat. We have some fantastic people working behind the scenes there, and they can certainly get you set up if you give them a bit of information about what you're trying to build and the extent of features that you'll need. They'll be able to point you in the right direction of which plan will work for you right now and how that scales, if and when you're ready to do all of that. Awesome. Let's see here. We've got just a few minutes left. I've got, it's like Sean and you and I talked about this beforehand of like I've got some demos in my pocket, but we're kind of like, we're kind of getting to the end of this 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And maybe I can show very briefly because someone was asking about again in the registration was asking about A/B testing
Mhm.
and what different methods we have to do that. So I'll just as briefly as I possibly can try to show um, the the version that we have right now. And
While
we
you're getting that set up,
yeah,
and then I can answer your question real quick. We do have office hours. Right now, we have it at once a month. We will kind of see in the future, depending on if we want to increase that frequency or if we want to keep it the same. But as of right now, we have it monthly.
thanks, Sean. I saw OO and I was wondering, and for some reason that didn't register with me
Yeah, it took me a
what
second
that was, believe it or not.
to hours. Yeah, please
Okay,
correct
so
me if it's not office hours though.
all right, let's clear the screen here a little bit. And make this bigger. So I actually have two VPSs here that I use for, all sorts of experimentation. And if you sorry, lots of wrapping going on, but I have two very basic containers running on each of these at port 4000. And the the version of load balancing that works right now is where you would set up, or sorry, the version of A/B testing that works right now is that you would, if you have two versions of the same app that you want to test out against each other, you would create an agent endpoint that points to the port that this service is running on. Both of these are running on port 4000. And in the architecture that I really like is that you create an internal endpoint for this so that the service itself is not exposed to the internet, but you will be able to forward traffic to it from a cloud endpoint. So I am going to go ahead and start one there. I'm going to start a second one on the other VPS pointing toward v2.internal. So I have both of these up and running, but like you can't access, this is not a real domain, like a real URL. You can't access that from anywhere else. Then what I can do, let me open my dashboard and pull it on over here. let's see. I did not create one already, so I can create a cloud endpoint, which is, if you're not familiar with cloud endpoints yet, they are sort of always on persistent endpoints that run entirely in the ngrok network. So they're not tied to an agent, and they're great. They kind of operate like a serverless function. They can take action on your traffic without you having to really manage it as a piece of infrastructure. So maybe I will I'll attach this cloud domain or cloud endpoint to abtest.joelhans.xyz, create that cloud endpoint. And as Ishan showed earlier, you have this traffic policy editor directly available to you. What I'm going to do is take this traffic policy file and replace that. And I will show you, I will explain what that does in a moment. But if I can type, we should, oh, of course, things never, did I just put it in the wrong? Oh, I didn't have, there's no dash. Okay. Still not working. Oh, this is what I get for not being V1 internal, V2 internal. Okay, well, what I can explain here is that I'm using this macro that says like if the random value that is created here is greater than zero point 0.01, we're forwarding to the sort of production, the V1 version of our application. If it is less than zero point 0.01, we're forwarding to the new version of our application. And that basically is saying like 90% of traffic is going to the original version and 10% gets kind of filtered off and goes to our second version. And and yeah, that's very flexible. You can change this to different values depending on kind of the percentage of traffic that you want to be able to pass to one endpoint versus another. Um, Wondering if there's any awesome. Yeah, sacrifice to the demo gods. That's what I should have done beforehand. It's always very frustrating because you want to troubleshoot it right here and right. Oh, now it's working. Um, I just needed to wait a minute. So this is just a very simple service that I'm running that kind of spits back a response about what's going on. You can maybe pretend that this is saying like V1 as opposed to Cloud A. But if I hit this a bunch of times, we'll see that there's one from our Cloud B or V2 version, but then we're still getting mostly responses from this version. You can see here in the ngrok agent for each of these, we've got like it's a 9 or 10 to 1 balance, exactly what we were kind of expecting based on this traffic policy. And there's another version of A/B testing and load balancing called endpoint pools that is we're just starting to talk about it, and I wish I had more time to dig into a full demo on endpoint pools, but I think we'll have to save that for the next one when we're ready to kind of champion that and celebrate it. Awesome. It looks like, we've got a few people kicking around asking questions, but we are kind of running up onto the end of our standard 45 minutes or so. So I think it's probably a good time to just wrap things up. If you have questions for myself or Ishan, you can, you can email me. Maybe I'll just drop my email in the chat here before we all take off. And if Sean feels like doing that, he can as well. There's plenty of other places to reach out to us as well. support@ngrok.com, as I said before, if you have technical questions about your account or you're running into some issues with getting things set up. But as we're kind of wrapping this one up, I'm pretty excited about what's to come for office hours in the future. This is the sixth session that we've had, and I think we have a nice cadence going. We kind of, despite the demo guides kind of coming in and ruining things on occasion, things flow pretty smoothly. But I've never loved the fact that this is happening on Zoom. I think it's a bit restrictive, and I don't know what anyone else feels about here, but I feel like the less time I can spend on Zoom in any given day, the happier I am. And I'm sure like this is one of many Zoom calls or meetings that you all are on. So we are going to be starting next month migrating office hours over to a platform called StreamYard. It's kind of, I think what a lot of streamers use for their live streams. And what we are going to use it for is have office hours be a lot more accessible to you all. There will still be registration. You can still fill out a question ahead of time or ask your question ahead of time, and we'll try to get to it during these sessions. But you can also watch it directly on the StreamYard website. We will have a landing page, if you will, on the ngrok website where you can watch live. We will also be multicasting to our YouTube channel and our LinkedIn at the very least. We're going to see maybe we'll support another platform or two as we get this rolling. But it's going to be a bit of an experiment, but I think it will be a lot more open for you all so that if you don't want to, register, you can just find us on YouTube, join us live, chat with us that way. We'll try to be in all the different chats all at once and respond to people where they are. And I think that will be an exciting new chapter for us in office hours. So I hope you all will join us then. Registration for that will open, I don't know, let's say in an hour as we go behind the scenes and get everything up and running. But would be very happy to see a bunch of you back there for the StreamYard version of office hours. With that, Ishan, thank you so much for joining today to talk about AI and showing us that demo.
Of course.
Yeah, and
Thanks for
another
having me.
of course, yeah, it was really great. I'm really excited about all the stuff we're going to be doing in the near future around AI, and there's plenty of content to come aside from this, blog posts and tutorials and everything like that. So this was kind of our first foray into that space. So stay tuned for a lot more. And I'll be bringing more people in like Ishan. Maybe Ishan will come back sometime in the future, but I want to have office hours be more open to the people here and the things they're building and the things they're excited about. So again, thanks to Sean and thanks everybody for joining for the vibrant chat and interesting questions. And we will see you all next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.